Everybody, this is Dream, and today we're going to bring you a four-game college basketball slate that starts at 6 p.m. Eastern. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? We'll get back to NBA tomorrow. The NBA slate's kind of wonky today, so really didn't like it at all. Looking at this college basketball slate is also somewhat of a rough slate, but we do have four games here. We're going to break down each of the games. I do have two guys I really do like a lot, but they are fairly expensive and somewhat hard to roster, but I do have them listed here. Carter for Providence and Dom Sack for Illinois, but I'll talk about them as I go. I wouldn't necessarily say these are core plays. I just think they have the most favorable matchups on the slate. Looking at the Providence Villanova game, this is the lowest scoring game on the slate with 137 point total. All three of the other games are 151 or more. This game also has the tightest spread at just 4.5 points in Nova's favor. I actually think that either one of these teams could win this game. Providence defense and offense are slightly worse than Nova's, but not by much, and both these teams play a slow down pace. That said, they do have some utility here on the slate despite that, as we're going to look at Carter here first for Providence, as he has the biggest upside on this for this game, as he's got a high ceiling, especially with the injuries to Hopkins for Providence. He's gonna have some opportunity. He's been pretty much around what he needs to 4x most games this season, and he's been even more consistent since Hopkins went down. So he's a very interesting play today, despite it being a slow down game. He's definitely my favorite play on the slate. As for other players on Providence, obviously they aren't favored, but Carter is clearly the top option. As for anybody else, Pierre and Aduro are probably the top two guys to look at a little bit, but they do carry some risk. I think Pierre is probably a little bit safer than Aduro due to he's a lot cheaper, but Aduro does have a pretty high ceiling, though he does have a low floor for the slate. And then Gaines and Duel both have some utility, but they definitely carry a lot of risk. I think Gaines is slightly better than Duel, but with Duel coming off the bench, but they definitely carry a lot of risk on this one. Looking at Villanova, it's really hard to like this team as they are, even though they are favored in a slowdown game, and they've not played well lately, and they are overpriced, which it's hard to say they're overpriced since nobody's really priced all that high. But honestly, it was hard to really like anybody here. Dixon is probably the best option on the team, but it's definitely a riskier position situation for him. He does have a floor that's pretty good and a ceiling that's pretty good too, but not as good compared to other players in his price range. As for Hart, who's also a starter, he definitely has some potential today. And then Longino for them as well. He is coming off the bench, but he does have a ceiling that's higher than what he needs to 4x. He just has an extremely low floor. That's basically true for Hart as well, but Hart probably won't have the ceiling that Longino has. Looking at the UAB SMU game here, this game features 151 point total. It's a 7.5 point favorite for SMU. These two teams are actually pretty evenly matched, so UAB's got a little bit better offense, but both games are a little bit similar in defense. But if we look at the individual player situation, I do think that SMU's got the advantage here as they just have more guys that can fill it up. They're also a little bit more expensive on the slate than most of the UAB guys as well, so that is interesting. But we do have three players that are definitely worth a look. Um, First would be Phelps here for them. Obviously, he's one of the most expensive players on his team. His ceiling is higher than what he needs today, but he does have a lower floor, so that is a little bit of concern. If this game gets in a mucky area, the guards for SMU could definitely have some troubles today, so you do want to keep that in mind. I also think Williamson for them has some upside today, and he's got a pretty good matchup here, so he's definitely got a relatively safe floor and a pretty good ceiling here. But he still carries some risk, but he's definitely one of the better plays on this team. And then Smith here for Tyreek Smith. That is, he started the last game finally. He's back. He's up into the starting lineup, which has removed another guy from the lineup, but which it was Ambrose Hilton. But he played pretty well in that game. I'm going to show you that he scored 31 fantasy points, so he's definitely a capable option today. I do think he has some upside in this matchup, and he's definitely worth a look here. Though he does carry a little bit of risk with his low floor. If he starts again, he's definitely somebody I would consider on the slate. Wright for them is also in play off the bench, though he's very risky. And then Harris as a starter does have some utility, but definitely carries some risk as well. So Overall, I do think this team has some potential today, but it definitely carry. Yeah, I think the forwards have a little bit more of an advantage in Smith and Williamson, but um, they do have some risk on this one. Looking at the UAB team here. This team is not much here to like. They are a little bit overpriced here. Lindenborg is the only guy that has big time upside for the price, but he does carry a low floor. I will show you him here. He's played pretty inconsistent throughout the season, and he has a very low floor. Like I said, if you can see in 2 of the last 4 games, he's been under 20 fantasy points. But he does have that high ceiling, and he does sometimes get a double-double opportunity. So he's definitely in play on the slate, but he definitely carries some risk. Same goes for well, we have 2 other guys for this team that have some potential today, and Johnson, though he is a very low floor and not really a high enough ceiling to matter, and then Gaines, who has a decent ceiling, but he hasn't played particularly great lately, so he's not a great option on the slate, especially for a team that doesn't look like it's going to do all that well on this particular game. Looking at the Nebraska-Illinois game, we do feature some team players here that we do like. If we look at this matchup, this game also has 153-point total, which is just 2 points higher than the SMU game. Now, this game does feature a 10-point favorite in Illinois. This game should be Illinois' to take care of, as Nebraska is one of the worst offense and defensive teams on the slate. But they do up-tempo the pace, and Illinois is going to try to play pretty balanced on this one. So I do think this is a game that you can definitely get a couple guys from. Obviously, Illinois, I like to win this, and I like Domsack. Despite the tougher defensive matchup in the paint, his floor is really good, and his ceiling, while it is high, he has that good potential today. He's not as good of a play as Carter for Providence, but he's definitely a viable option on this slate, even though he does carry a little bit of risk. Terrence Shannon is back for Illinois. Regardless of what you think about that, he's back to playing now. Now, his floor the last few games has been lower, and his minutes have been a little bit inconsistent, but I do think he has some potential today for a big game. I think the off-court stuff is definitely distracting him, though, so do, play him with a lot of risk if you decide to play him. Hawkins also has some playability today, though he's been really inconsistent, and he's had some really bad games the last 2. Hopefully he can bounce back here. He's also been in some foul trouble the last 3 games, as you can see, with 4 fouls in each one. So there's a little concern there, but he's definitely got some capability. And then Guerrier for them as well has some potential today, but he has also had some rough games lately, and he does carry some risk. But overall, I do think this team does have some viability. Looking at Nebraska, we really only have the one guy in Linden. Shoot. Uh, we only have really one guy that I like here in Williams. He's played decently well lately, though he definitely carries a low floor. He has a pretty good ceiling, though, and he has played decently well, but definitely carries some risk. Tominga and Lawrence can both get to where we want them to go, but they definitely carry a lot of risk in this matchup, and this is not a great team to get a lot of guys from. Looking at the Stanford-Arizona game, last but not least, this game features the highest total on the slate. I actually think that, Stanford is one of the worst teams on the slate outside of Nebraska, and they also play slow down, but Arizona's going to push the ball, and they're going to be one of the best offenses and defenses on the slate. Now, I'm going to note that the last time in the last game, Arizona was projected to win in a blowout, which is the same case today, but they were priced a lot lower than they are today, so their prices have come up a lot. That does make them a little bit harder to roster today. However, we do have a couple guys that are worth looking at, one being Love. Now, the blowout risk here is real, but he has a high ceiling. He's definitely worth a look, though his price is a little higher than I like. If I was going to choose between Love and Domsack, I think that you could kind of go either way, but I think Domsack is slightly safer just because of his higher floor. Then we're also going to look at Balo for them. Now, he's also a little bit pricey today, and his minutes have been inconsistent, especially in the blowouts where he gets less. But he's still managing to fill up the board, though he has a lower floor than we like for the slate. I also think Lewis here, who is going to come off the bench, has been playing pretty well in his limited minutes, and so he does have some potential to be a viable value play, but he definitely carries a lot of risk. Boswell is also carrying some risk today, but with his price coming up some, he definitely carries some upside, though, in a blowout potential game, as he usually plays pretty good in these games. It's usually the tight games that he has more trouble in. So I do think he has some utility on the slate. Looking at Stanford, this team is rough. This is the worst matchup that you could ever want for this team. They have a couple guys that have some potential to score enough fantasy points to pay off, as they aren't overpriced or anything, but they definitely carry a lot of risks. So, play this team with a grain of salt. Reynard is their, he's been playing probably the best on the team, and he does have a high ceiling, but his floor is pretty low for this game. Similar, both Michael Jones and Spencer Jones both have some potential, but they are extremely risky on the slate, as well as Brandon Angel. I think I'm mostly going to avoid Stanford as a team, but Bynum coming off the bench also potentially has some utility, but he hasn't played much since he's been back from injury. So, with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.